From Nashville, Tennessee, Music City, USA, and the home of hot chicken, it's the Rick Altizer Show. Sit back, buckle up. Rick will talk with the movers, shakers, and creators who put Christ in Christian entertainment. He's a man who's clear so the world can hear. Here's Rick Altizer.
Hey, thank you for joining me today. That was Bob Allen, the voice of the Rick Altizer Show. And yes, Nashville is the home of hot chicken, and I have no idea why that's in there, but it just is. And today I'm really, I say this so many times, but it's especially true today. I'm really excited about my guest. I don't throw this around lightly, but I would have to say a Christian music legend, pretty much responsible for what we know of as contemporary Christian music with his band Love Song. From there, at Calvary Chapel, Maranatha Music sprung out of that. From there, we have what's now considered contemporary worship. So if you have a guy in your church with a guitar and he sings songs and you don't have an organ doing hymns, it's kind of, you can thank this guy here, my guest today, Chuck Girard. Chuck, I'm just honored to have you on the show. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure, Rick.
So met you in 1982. And he said my face looked familiar, so that's pretty amazing.
Well, you know, we do have these deep memories, so
yes,
a lot of people look familiar, but you don't know them. But some people you should know and you don't. So,
and here we are.
You look familiar to me.
Well,
yeah.
Thank you. I just kind of have that face.
Yeah, I guess
that terrorist face. But anyway, we kind of started off talking about you as a music legend. Starting with Love Song. And so can we just fill people in on Love Song and what that was and that era and when that was?
Well, legend always gets a little daunting to me. We were just a bunch of hippies in the right place at the right time. And the quick history is that we had been studying Eastern philosophies and, you know, in the whole 60s thing with the Beatles and George Harrison, the Hindu and all that stuff, looking into everything, including the Bible. And we just kept narrowing it down. The more we studied, the more we felt the Bible was the one that contained the most truth that we were looking for. I mean, we weren't trying to be arbitrary about the truth. We just wanted the truth. But it seemed the Bible had the best system of truth of all the things we were studying. And so we kind of narrowed it down to that and pushed in that direction. And then, of course, God was involved. And we were living in Laguna Beach, actually, you know, pretty nice home. I don't know how we managed to rent it, but we lived communally, and it was in a real nice area of Laguna Beach up on the mountain overlooking the ocean. And we started to hear about this place called Calvary Chapel, and now a number of us were in trouble with the law. Some of us had gone through light jail sentences for drugs. A couple of us had trials pending. I had one pending in Las Vegas for pulled over for possession of drugs, and so God had us right where He wanted us. And so we started to hear about this place called Calvary Chapel, and we thought we should check it out because hippies were going there. And so we went up there one night, and it was so different from anything I'd ever experienced before. And I went up there one night alone and went to an evening service. I sat in the back so I could make a quick getaway if I didn't like what was going on. But God had different ideas, and He just grabbed my heart that night. And I started to weep and laugh. And I mean, it was really quite embarrassing if I had cared, but I didn't. And just released all of that burden I've been carrying. And the best I knew how, I gave my heart to the Lord that night. I didn't go to the front for the altar call. I didn't know about that and wasn't really kind of in that. I did later on as an official gesture, but that night I just thought, this feels good, God. If this is it, I'm here for the duration. If you're a big enough God that if this is just a stepping stone, you can move me to the next level or whatever. And that's been nearly 50 years now, and I never looked back. And then, of course, my friends in the commune, we were all musicians. It wasn't really officially. I don't want people to get the idea of this commune. It was just a house in Laguna Beach, but we lived communally. And several of them got born again, independent of each other, at Calvary and at Melody Land. And so there's about 4 of us that had this experience. We started going to Calvary on a regular basis, and they had a hippie preacher there named Lonnie Frisbee. And we thought, how cool, a preacher that looks like Jesus, you know. And if we could play here. They'd have a band that sounded cool and looked like Crosby, Stills and Nash or something. So we went in to see Pastor Chuck Smith. During the week, we just went in the office and we wanted to talk to him about playing there. And he graciously granted us a little interview and took us out to the sanctuary and started to ask us about how we got saved and that kind of stuff. He told me years later, he said, there was no way when you guys walked in the office that I was going to let you on the platform with long hair and beards and drums and guitars. But at the end of the interview, he asked us to play a song. And so we did. And the Holy Spirit really just fell. And his heart was touched. And the next thing we heard was, can you guys play tonight? Right? That's a pretty good audition. Uh-huh. And we said, what time? And he said, 7 o'clock. And we said, well, Fred Field, our guitar player, is in jail doing weekends in Orange County Jail, but he gets out at 6, so I think we can make it. And so we did. We went and rounded up Fred and came to Calvary and played for that first time. I do believe Lonnie did speak that night. And it was, as you know, these cliches are overused phrases, but it doesn't mean they're not true. It was electric, and it was history, and it was the beginning of the big surge there at Calvary Chapel. We grew from 200 to 2,000 in about 4 months. The hippies were just telling their friends, and it was the perfect environment. And
he was baptizing hippies in the ocean,
absolutely.
1,000 a pop or something.
That's correct.
I mean, it was just an amazing. The story of Chuck Smith's story is something to look into. He was I believe he was an Assembly of God.
Foursquare.
Foursquare. That's right. He's a Foursquare pastor. He said, why aren't people changing? Why are they still have the same problems, you know? And so he started teaching verse by verse through the Word and just got this heart for hippies and started having them come live with him in his home. And then that whole Jesus movement that we saw was happening right there in the little country church that you sang about on the first album.
That's right.
And so from that, you're kind of on the crest of what we now look at as the Jesus movement. You're on the crest of that wave as it's just coming up. You're kind of, really. Would you say you're outside of Larry Norman, who was kind of doing his own thing? Inside that church there, you guys were kind of the first Christian band.
The
really.
way I define our role, because I don't really like it when people say he's the father or he's the father.
Right.
You know, if you want to
Sure.
give that title, it probably belongs to Larry Norman because he was the very first. His album came out before ours did in 1969. I think I wasn't even born again until February of 70. So, but there were many contributions. Andre Crouch had his contribution, but there were only several. You know, and Love Song's contribution, in my opinion, Larry was too edgy for the church. He was writing for sinners, you know. He was writing for secular audience. But we were writing kind of the Christian side of things. And
you had beautiful harmonies. You had that beautiful voice, that Beach Boy kind of voice that blended, and everyone was singing, and you had country and rock, but it wasn't.
It wasn't as threatening, and so it was more embraced by the parents and things.
Right.
And so I look at and then especially I look at our contribution like that we made it, kind of crossed it over into acceptability, which Larry probably never could have done. But
he's singing about gonorrhea and broken needles in your vein. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, he's really street. You know, he wasn't speaking
Powerful,
to the church.
Amazing stuff too. I love Larry's stuff. So anyhow, everybody played their role, but what was really, I think, a very seminal, or what do you say, a watershed moment in Christian music was Explo 72 in Dallas in 1972. Music was just beginning to emerge. People were becoming aware of it. And we actually got invited to this event where other artists that were more mainstream and some of the popular supposed Christian, I don't know who was or who wasn't, but people like Johnny Cash and Chris Christopherson that were perceived as Christians at that time were invited. And somehow we got invited. And on a Friday night in the Cotton Bowl for well over 100,000 people.
Wow.
From all over the world that had come. Now, to set the stage, everybody was suspicious. Are hippies really saved? Hippie Christians. You know, if God saved them on the inside, why doesn't he clean them up on the outside? And so we played, and right after we played, Billy Graham got up and spoke. And I've talked to a lot of people who were there, and they said that was the moment that our church opened their mind to maybe it's okay to have drums, maybe it's okay to have electric guitars. Because at that time, you were the freak if you brought those things into the church. Now you're the freak if you don't have them. You know?
Right.
So,
I mean, it's so interesting how the headaches you had to endure back then about, I want to have an electric guitar in a church. Mm-hmm. We're going to have a drum set in a church.
Right.
that beat, the syncopation of that beat, that's the devil's music. I mean, all that stuff is just, it's a non-starter today. I mean, it's not even, and like you said, if you don't have the drum beat, and then you're considered a out of date, off the chart church that's out of touch.
You live here in Nashville, that you go into most of these churches and it sounds like a rock concert, perfectly mixed. And I go to a church where some of the greatest players in town play on the worship team, and they're just doing sessions all week long for the biggest artists in Christian and secular music. So it's a different world now. In our day, it was, a simple little PA system. We played in Manila for 100,000 kids at a college with one microphone. Debbie Kerner and Mike McIntosh, and we went over there. Our record went to number 1 on the charts in Manila. It was during the time where they weren't letting anyone in, and so people were really thrilled that there was an artist from the outside world, but they didn't know we were Christians, and because our song was called Love Song, and you might know the song. It's not really blatantly about the Lord.
To a love song. Anyway, I can sing it all to you right now. I'm seriously, my high school. I mean, I don't mean to be gush. I was telling my wife today. I'm sorry, comment here. I was telling my wife, it's an amazing life that I'm going to sit down with Chuck Girard. I'm going to sit across from Chuck Girard, and sometimes I have to, take myself out of myself, but it's like, you were such a huge part of my high school. Growing up, I had Larry Norman, I had Stonehill, Phil Keaggy, and Love Song. I mean, that was like it. So, I mean, I wore out those records. Your first solo album, I said, Rick, what do you want to be? Well, you want to be a rock star or a preacher. And so I said, well, why don't you do both? And then you come out with Rock and Roll Preacher. Who would ever thought I'd be a rock and roll preacher? First song on the first album, I was like, you were just you're singing my life. And so,
that's
anyway, I'm gushing a little bit. I usually don't do this on the show, but,
Oh, it's wonderful. Thank you.
I just want you to know, you got no idea of how you impact people. Yeah. You serve Jesus, you do what you do, and people listening, you're in your grind, but you have no idea on how you can impact someone for Christ years later, and they come back and say, Little Pilgrim, man, I would cry listening to that song. God really worked in my heart in that song because I felt like an orphan. And he, in that song, I realized I have a father. I have a heavenly father I can come home to, and it really connected with me. And so, you just have no idea. So thank you, Chuck, for being all these years still faithful, still serving our King.
That's wonderful. Due to social media, I do get a lot of good feedback that keeps me going because I do get those comments and those emails now from people who tell me the story just like you just did. So it's awesome, and I'm very appreciative and humbled by it.
You're listening to the Rick Altizer Show. My guest today, I've said it once, I'm just going to keep saying it, music legend Chuck Girard from the band Love Song and a solo. So anyway, we're getting back to the band, and this I can see how this is going to take. This is going to be great. I'm loving this. Can we go back? So let's go back to the hippie guys, the guy who had to get out of jail to come play guitar at church. Will you play on a tonight? And so, can we talk from there to record deal? How did that happen? How was that journey?
Yeah, that was about a year progress there. What happened was we garnered a lot of interest here. Let me clarify that the Jesus movement didn't start at Calvary Chapel, but the media attention did. There was a lot of bubbling under up Berkeley and back east and different places there where people were doing similar things, even Christian music. Phil Keaggy was starting to do Christian music. And but it all kind of gelled for the media at Calvary Chapel, and they started to come down there and get all. We'd come in on a Wednesday night, and all the lights were being set up for ABC special they were going to film, and then do next week you'd see it on TV as a special on Jesus movement, on hippies getting saved. So it was a very, very amazing time. And through that, we got exposure to a lot of record companies. We had Columbia Records came down, sent a guy down to hear us. They actually offered us a deal. We had a meeting with some of the people that know music will know who Ahmet Ertegun is. He started Atlantic Records, discovered Ray Charles. He came to we had a special troubadour night. They had a hootenanny night, and we played after hours as an audition for him, and he nearly signed us.
To Atlantic.
to Atlantic. We had a meeting with him at the Beverly Hills Hotel, and he's sitting there, he's listening to Changes. He says, "That's a Stone hit." And so we thought, man, this guy's going to go for it. And then all of a sudden there's a phone call. And it was the Rolling Stones representative, and they had just decided that they were going to bring their label to Atlantic. And he got all interested in that and dropped us, and we never heard, But I think it was the Lord's grace, because it wasn't the place that God. But he wanted us to have the opportunity to witness. We did ask him about the Lord. He said, "Well, I'm at that time a Muslim." We didn't call them Muslims then. He said, "Well, I'm a Muslim," and that was the end of that. But we got to witness to Ahmet Ertegun, and so we did have a lot of interest from secular labels. And so there was a company called National General that's defunct now. It was a movie company, and they had a music division, and a guy named Freddie Pirro ran it. And somehow he got a hold. I think it was through. I had a secular manager still from my before I was a Christian, and I think he set that up. So we had a meeting with Freddie Pirro. Long story short, after a couple of meetings, we take him out in the parking lot, we pray for him, and he gets saved. And now he wants to leave National General and start a Christian label. So he did. It was called Good News, which we thought was so hip in those days, and we had no idea that that was the cliche name for the gospel for all the Christians in the world forever. Oh, it's the good news of Jesus Christ. We just thought, because we used to say good news. Say, "Hey, that's good news, man." Somebody said, "Hey, I just got some money." "Oh, yeah, good news, man." So we thought that was a cool name, and we didn't connect it with the idea that it was cliche to most Christians.
And gospel.
So that was our first record, came out of there. And Freddie came down also, getting ahead of myself a little. He came down to hear us, and he loved what we were doing. And he got financing somehow, and we started to record at Gold Star Studios, which is a legendary studio where Phil Spector cut all the Wall of Sound records and the Beach Boys. And we recorded the first album there. And then we mixed it over at a different place in Hollywood. And that album came out with no fanfare, no promotion really of any significance. And just people just gravitated to it. I don't even know how they found it. But I think really more word of mouth than anything. There was a industry publication called Gospel Music Journal that had a survey every year, a chart, of best, kind of like the Grammys, best album of the year, best artist. And so the best album of the year was like Bill Gaither Trio, Lanny was Davis, Lanny Wolf or whatever trio, and Other. And we won best album on Other.
All right.
People wrote our album, and we weren't even officially on the ballot. So that's how impacting it was for people. And so that was the beginning of the. We were with United Artists for distribution at that time, and that's how our record got over to the Philippines and got played on secular radio, and gave us the opportunity to go over there and play for. Where I told you we played for that college for 100,000 kids.
Wow! So there was no infrastructure. There was no Christian music infrastructure. It didn't exist. This guy Freddie had to build a label, and so how it's very underground, really, when you think about it.
Totally at that time.
How did your record get sold? I mean, how did people buy it? How did people find it? Did it somehow end up in Christian bookstores? Because there wasn't really even was there even a pipeline to Christian bookstores at that time?
At Calvary there was, through Mike McIntosh. And what happened was there was a Christian girl that worked for United Artists, and they didn't want to fill any small orders, which is the heartbeat of gospel. We want 5 copies of Love Song, not 500 copies for Tower Records or 1,000 copies. So they were kind of ignoring those orders, and she was taking those orders and giving them to Mike McIntosh, who was fulfilling them out of his garage. He'd just send the records out to the people. So we found out pretty quick. I think we did about 70,000 albums, though, through that system. And then Freddie realized, hey, this isn't really getting it. Let's go talk to Word and do the Christian thing. And so we did. We had meetings with Word, and eventually, I don't know how we got out of the other deal, but somehow the record went over to Word, and they started to distribute, and then it just escalated very quickly from there because they knew how to service that market. So that was the arrangement that was in place through the rest of that decade, which was from 1970 to 1980. And then I left. I started my solo career in 75. Love Song disbanded in 74. And by 1980, I had pulled out, and I was one of the first independent artists. I got out of the whole thing. They had just moved here to Nashville, and I felt like the Lord just told me, don't go with them. I mean, not move there, but don't go. I've got other plans for you. And so I started making my own records, and I made probably about the time you saw me, Name Above All Names had just come out or was about ready to come out. And that was my first independent project. And then I've done everything since then independently. So,
wow, yeah. What a story. So let's talk about the love song, the band. Mm-hmm. You guys were coming out of drugs, getting saved. You're doing music. You haven't really. I wouldn't say you were mature Christians yet.
No, we weren't at all.
Was there still world in you guys? Was there still the struggle there? And
not so much.
Some of your lifestyle.
A little bit in the drug thing. Because when we first got born again, we still lived in Laguna Beach, and for how the devil works.
Right.
All the guys that we knew guys from the Canyon, from Timothy Leary, and all these drug dealers we knew. All of a sudden, free drugs were coming in. They come to our door, and they say, hey, this Colombian gold came in, and you guys want a lid? And we go, well, we can repent next week. And so a couple of weeks of struggling there, and then we decided we need to get out of here. And there was a guy at the church that had a little room above his garage. We moved in there for a month. It was like tar paper and studs. And we were so happy. We were out of Laguna Beach. We were writing some music, and we were just happy to be at Calvary and loving God. And then a couple in the church became empty nesters, and they adopted us for like a couple of years, and they brought us into their home. They said, we'll support you guys while you get on your feet. And they ran an apartment complex there in Costa Mesa that is now called the Maranatha Apartments on Eldon Avenue. And as we got married, we would take an apartment and some of the guys. And so they became our foster parents for that season.
You guys all lived in the same complex?
Yeah, for a while.
How long did you live as a band together?
As a band together, just about a month outside of the Laguna Beach thing. But we weren't Christians. And as a Christian band, we lived for about a month over the garage, and then for about a year and a half. I think probably for a year and a half we were all living in the Dean and Jean Gilbert were their names, and they're both gone to
complex there.
Yeah, complex there. So I think they're both gone to be with the Lord now. But they were great days, and they kind of gave us the ability. Pastor Chuck would call us. He knew we were on call, and he'd call us up at spur of the moment. He'd 4:00, say, "Hey guys, get your guitars. We're leaving at 5. I'm going out to Riverside or whatever, and do a meeting and do the music." So we were just there. Yes, sir. It was like we were on call. And then eventually the word got out. We were so innocent, so naive about church thing that when we started to get invitations to go to other churches, we came to Chuck and said, "Chuck, are we supposed to go somewhere else than Calvary? Are we just supposed to play here? God put us here." "Oh, no, boys, go on out." And then we did a tour, and, he embraced us to get out of the nest. But we didn't know. We thought, God put us here. Maybe this is where we're not supposed to play down the road here.
It had never been done before.
It had not.
There was no... there was no band to look at and say, okay, that's what they're doing, we'll do that, And so you're literally paving the road for what we now know as contemporary Christian music.
And I like to say that we were making it up as we went along. And we grew so quickly that we were in the circus tent within months. We outgrew the little sanctuary, only held 200 or 300 people. So with 2,000 people, you can do so much putting them outside on the patio with a speaker. But eventually Chuck realized he needed a bigger venue, so we put up a circus tent that held about 2,000 till they built the sanctuary that's there today. But yes, we were winging it, even to the idea of, we had no idea about different denominations and how they would receive us and stuff, so we had a lot of stories about that kind of thing too. So
it's just amazing. Well, I'd like to, if you don't mind, I'm very interested. Let's continue this conversation on part 2, and I'd love to talk about some of your early work as a secular artist. You actually had hits on the radio, and had number 9 song. I mean, you had some hits.
Number 9.
The Hondels and the Shandels?
The Castels.
Castels. Okay, and I didn't know why you didn't do love songs, the Love L's. I figure you got to have the L's in.
Yeah, right.
Castels and the Hondels. And then I'd like to talk about some of those early days of Christian music and what some of the challenges were of paving the way there, and then they get a bit more of your story. So,
Sure.
So anyway, will you come back with us next week for part 2 of my interview with Chuck Girard? Chuck, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And you can get more info on Chuck, his music, and his concerts by going to chuckgirard.com. That's GIRARD.com. If there's a show you've missed, you can go to my website, rickaltizer.com, and catch up. Or you can listen to my podcast in iTunes or wherever you hear your podcasts. Just search for The Rick Altizer Show. Altizer is spelled Altizer. I want to thank you for listening. Hey, would you tell a friend about this show and share the love? Be sure to check us out again next week as we discuss how we communicate the gospel through media to our culture. Let's be clear so the world can hear. I'll talk to you next week. Thanks for listening.